Welcome to the eBusiness Playbook podcast, proudly sponsored by Academy Global, where we help you go from theory to reality, empowering you to elevate your e-business. Join our open community at the eBusiness Playbook by Academy on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our training packages at academyglobal.com to find out more.
Welcome to the eBusiness Playbook.
It's great to be back.
We're back, and today we're diving into something absolutely vital, maybe even survival level crucial for any business owner trying to, thrive in the digital space.
That's right. You launch an e-business project, could be a new platform, maybe a big website overhaul, or a complex feature rollout. The goal is always growth, efficiency, innovation.
It should be engines for moving forward, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the sobering reality. Sources we've been digging through really underscore a surprisingly, shockingly high number of these initiatives they don't make it. They fail to meet their objectives.
Yeah, the material points to estimates that are, frankly, quite stark. We're talking somewhere between 70%, and get this, 90% of these e-business initiatives never fully deliver on what they set out to do.
Wait, 70 to 90%? That statistic alone is staggering.
It is.
Think of the resources, the energy, the money poured into that. It makes you immediately ask, why? Why is that failure rate so incredibly prevalent in a space that's supposed to be the future?
That's the central question our deep dive into these sources aim to answer. And they highlight that the roots of failure aren't usually some single dramatic error, but more like a confluence of common, often predictable pitfalls.
Okay, let's really get into what those sources identify as the fundamental reasons projects stumble, maybe even before they find their footing. What's one of the first big traps?
Well, a really foundational issue the sources keep coming back to is a simple lack of clear objectives.
Sounds basic.
It does sound basic, but without a shared, crystal clear understanding of exactly what the project is meant to achieve, how can you measure success? How do you even know where to point your resources?
Mm-hmm.
This kind of ambiguity leads to everyone sort of rowing in slightly different directions.
Right, it's like setting off on a journey without knowing the destination. You just wander. What else makes the list?
The classic scope creep. This is that insidious way project requirements gradually, almost sneakily, expand beyond what was originally agreed upon. A small, while we're at it here, a minor new feature request there, and suddenly the project is twice as big, it feels unmanageable, and inevitably starts missing deadlines and blowing the budget.
The project just keeps getting heavier until it buckles under its own weight, and I imagine related to that is often just dreaming too big without checking the map first.
Exactly. Unrealistic expectations are a huge demotivator, whether it's expecting overnight success or maybe underestimating the actual cost or overestimating the immediate ROI, setting goals without a solid basis in reality. That's just setting the team up for disillusionment when those expectations aren't instantly met.
Ambition without the grounding, yeah. What about the actual skills needed to steer the ship, so to speak?
That's another key point. The sources highlight that many times the right project management expertise simply isn't in place. You might have brilliant technical people, fantastic strategists, but project management is a distinct skill set. Putting someone without that specific training or experience in charge can severely hinder organization, coordination, and ultimately, execution. It's a bit like putting a brilliant chef in charge of running the entire restaurant business, different skills needed.
That makes perfect sense. They might make amazing food, but they don't necessarily know how to manage supply chains or staffing the front of the house effectively. What about just talking to each other? Seems simple, but...
Communication, or more accurately, the lack of it, is cited across the board. Ineffective internal communication creates misunderstandings, it fosters conflict, and it just cripples collaboration. The sources are really adamant. A solid communication strategy isn't just a nice to have, it's the essential glue holding the whole project together.
Misunderstandings definitely multiply in silence. And how does change itself factor in? Because these projects are change.
Exactly. Implementing change, especially something as significant as a new e-business system, without a structured approach to managing that change, what's often called change management it's a recipe for resistance. People get confused, they might disengage, and the project implementation struggles because the human side wasn't properly prepared or brought along.
People really need to understand why the change is happening and feel like they're part of it, not just having it done to them. And before any of this even kicks off, there's a fundamental step, sometimes missed, right? Doing the homework.
Yeah. Crucially, yes. Neglecting thorough market research. If you don't deeply understand the market you're entering, or critically the actual needs and desires of your customers, your project might end up solving a problem nobody has, or maybe missing a massive opportunity right in front of you. The outcome will simply be misaligned with what the market actually wants or needs.
So looking at these core pitfalls, fuzzy goals, runaway scope, those starry-eyed expectations, maybe insufficient management skill, talking at cross purposes, mishandling the change aspect, and not really knowing your market, you start to see how this high failure rate isn't so mysterious after all.
Yeah, it becomes clearer.
These are fundamental business challenges, just amplified in the complexity of digital projects. And these are risks you, as a business owner listening, need to be acutely aware of right from day one.
Absolutely. And the sources really dig into the fact that it's not just about the plan on paper or the process flowcharts. It's fundamentally about the people involved. The human element is so often the fulcrum upon which success or failure pivots.
That raises an important question then. What specifically about the human side does the deep dive highlight as critical, especially when we think about leadership?
Well, the sources list several characteristics that are pretty essential for leaders steering these kinds of projects. Things like integrity, empathy, really clear communication, having a compelling vision, being decisive, but also knowing how to delegate effectively and projecting confidence.
These aren't just buzzwords, though.
No, not at all. They directly help leaders set direction, build trust within the team, navigate the inevitable challenges that pop up, and create an environment where the team feels empowered and, collaborative. Strong leaders also take responsibility when things go sideways, and they actively encourage their teams to innovate, not just follow orders.
So the leader really sets the tone and ideally clears the path. What about the team dynamics themselves, how they interact?
Poor teamwork is flagged as a major issue. When teams operate in isolation, in their own silos, they often overlook dependencies or crucial needs from other departments. This leads to missed information, efforts that aren't aligned, and the project potentially working against broader business goals without anyone realizing it until it's too late. The sources really stress that effective channels for collaboration, real communication, are non-negotiable.
Working in little bubbles means no one sees the whole picture.
Definitely. And how does change management, which we touched on earlier, connect explicitly to the human side here?
It's deeply intertwined. Because rigorous change control processes, they aren't just bureaucratic hoops to jump through. They reduce risk by ensuring changes are actually evaluated and properly communicated. Embracing change management means actively facilitating communication and teamwork around the changes themselves, helping people understand, adapt, and stay engaged. Without that focus, people are just left confused, feeling misaligned, and often understandably resistant.
So it's about the process making the human transition smoother, not just managing tasks. And communication isn't just a strategy document filed away somewhere, but the daily reality. Precisely. Insufficient communication within the team and between different teams or departments just stops progress dead in its tracks sometimes. Misunderstandings flourish. Leaders absolutely must prioritize transparency, ensuring everyone knows their role, what others are working on, and the project's overall status and goals. An open culture where people feel safe to speak up, to raise concerns, that hugely enhances collaboration and problem solving.
It really sounds like building the right team and fostering a culture where communication and adaptation are genuinely valued is just as critical, maybe even more so, than plotting out the tasks on a timeline.
It is arguably more critical, yeah. Now let's shift gears a bit to an area that can unravel even the best laid plans and the most cohesive team, the finances.
The money side, always crucial. What are the big financial landmines the sources point to for these e-business projects?
Well, insufficient planning and budgeting are right there at the top. It seems many companies underestimate the true cost involved, or perhaps they fail to budget in enough detail for all the resources that will eventually be needed. There was one surprising finding from the sources, citing a survey where over 70% of organizations experience project delays, specifically because of inadequate planning and budgeting right up front.
Wow, over 70%. Delayed just because the money wasn't planned right? That's a massive bottleneck.
It is, and overlooking costs early on just sets up these unrealistic financial expectations that can doom the project down the line when reality hits.
And e-commerce specifically has some unique money flow challenges, doesn't it? Beyond just the budget.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Cash flow issues are particularly tricky in this space, even if you're making sales. Things like the timing of inventory purchases, your marketing spend, and when customer payments actually clear your account. These can create negative cash flow situations, even if, on paper, the business looks profitable.
So you could be profitable but still run out of cash.
Exactly. So effective cash flow management strategies, really understanding those cycles, are paramount for navigating these timing gaps.
It's not just revenue then, it's the actual pulse of money moving in and out of the business day to day. What about the mechanics of actually getting paid? Payment processing. Is that a risk area too?
That's another surprising area of risk the sources highlight, yes. Choosing a payment processor that isn't really the right fit for your specific business type or maybe your growth trajectory can lead to major headaches. We're talking about funds being frozen, accounts getting closed unexpectedly,
Oh, wow.
which causes significant cash flow disruption. Even rapid growth itself can sometimes trigger security holds from processors who are trying to manage their own risk. So the need to proactively communicate with your processors about anticipated changes, like a big marketing push or seasonal spike, is a key takeaway.
So you can do everything else right, make the sale, and still get sunk by unforeseen payment issues. That's rough. And what about transactions that just don't complete successfully in the first place? Failed payments.
Yeah, failed payments are a significant, often underestimated source of financial leakage. The sources point out that for B2C businesses, only a fraction, somewhere around 16 to 20% of payments that initially fail are ever successfully recovered later.
Only 16–20%? That's a lot of lost revenue.
It is, and the causes range from legitimate issues like insufficient funds on a customer's card to sometimes overly aggressive fraud prevention systems accidentally blocking good customers. So having robust systems and strategies in place to recover or at least mitigate failed payments is crucial, because otherwise that's just revenue disappearing into thin air.
What's fascinating here is how the deep dive shows that financial health for these projects isn't just about having a big enough budget. It's about meticulous management of costs, really understanding the timing of cash flow, and navigating the often complex plumbing of transaction processing itself.
Exactly. And as if managing everything inside your business wasn't challenging enough, these projects exist in a constantly moving external world that impacts everything you do.
Right, the business environment never sits still, does it? What are the big external forces the sources warn us to keep an eye on?
Well, economic conditions are a primary factor, naturally. Things like recessions, inflation, changes in interest rates, they directly affect consumer spending power. People just have less disposable income, or they become more cautious.
Makes sense.
These conditions can also increase your own operational costs, supplies, shipping, everything can get more expensive. Businesses have to be ready to adapt their offerings, maybe their pricing, their strategies, based on the prevailing economic climate.
When wallets get tighter, buying habits definitely change. What about the competitive landscape itself? It feels like e-commerce is particularly fierce.
Oh, it is. Market dynamics are incredibly competitive. The sources emphasize that doing a comprehensive competitor analysis isn't just optional. It's essential for understanding your position in the market, figuring out who's gaining market share, and identifying both their strengths and your weaknesses. Plus, consumer preferences and behaviors are constantly shifting. What was popular last year might be old news now.
Yeah.
You need to stay ahead of that curve.
Know your enemy, know your customer, and know that they're both changing all the time.
Got it. And then there are the rules you have to play by, the legal stuff.
Absolutely. The legal and regulatory environment is critical, and it's constantly evolving, which makes it tricky. Think about data protection laws like GDPR or CCPA, tax regulations for online sales that vary everywhere, specific e-commerce guidelines. Compliance is simply non-negotiable.
And the penalties can be severe? Exactly. Failure leads not just to potential penalties and fines, but also serious damage to your reputation, which can be harder to recover from. The sources even highlight that you need robust internal processes just to keep track of and implement updates to these laws and regulations.
So staying compliant is kind of a moving target you constantly have to track. And technology itself is an external force, isn't it? Both a tool and a challenge.
It really is. Technological advancements present both massive opportunities and significant challenges. If you fail to adopt new technologies that are relevant to your business, maybe better analytics, AI for customer service, automation, you risk falling behind, becoming obsolete. But successfully identifying and integrating the right solutions can dramatically enhance your customer experience, improve efficiency, give you a competitive edge. It's a constant balancing act, bit of a tightrope walk.
You have to evolve and risk being left behind by someone who does. Finally, how do broader societal trends play into this external picture?
Social and cultural influences are increasingly important drivers. Trends like sustainability, ethical sourcing, corporate social responsibility, these aren't just niche concerns anymore for many consumers. They actively influence purchasing decisions for a growing segment of the market. E-businesses really need to be attuned to these shifts and potentially align their strategies, their messaging, even their supply chains accordingly.
So what this section really hammered home from the sources is that successfully launching and running an e-business project requires this constant state of awareness and adaptation. You have to be tuned in to this incredibly dynamic external landscape. You can't just build it and forget it. The world outside your virtual walls is always changing the game.
And, seeing these abstract challenges play out in real-world scenarios is often the most impactful way to truly understand the consequences. The sources provide some notable cautionary examples.
Right, let's look at some of those cautionary tales. The CSS replacement project in Australia sound like a big technical ambition that ran into some problems.
It certainly did. The Australian Securities Exchange, the ASX, attempted to replace its core clearing and settlement system, a really fundamental piece of infrastructure, with a new platform based on blockchain technology.
Ambitious.
Very ambitious. It ultimately failed after years of effort and significant investment had already been poured in. The key takeaway from the sources here seems to be about overestimating the readiness or the actual capability of a new cutting-edge technology, and at the same time, drastically underestimating the sheer complexity of integrating it into mission-critical, deeply embedded, established systems.
A good reminder that sometimes the shiny new thing isn't quite ready for prime time, especially in really complex environments.
Yeah.
What about IBM's Watson for oncology? That seemed like such a promising idea on the surface.
It was a powerful vision, definitely. Using advanced AI to analyze vast amounts of cancer research and patient data to help doctors make better treatment decisions. Its reported struggles and, in many views, failures, according to the sources we looked at, stemmed largely from a significant misalignment. A gap between the sophisticated technology itself and the actual messy, practical realities of clinical workflow and the state of data within hospitals.
Ah, the reality gap.
Yeah, exactly. It serves as a sharp lesson on the absolute necessity of deep, practical market and user research before deploying complex technology. You have to understand the environment it needs to function in.
So understanding the context where the technology needs to live and work is completely non-negotiable. The sources also include the Boeing 737 MAX situation, which obviously is an e-business, but clearly there's a project failure lesson the sources wanted to highlight there.
Yeah, the reason it's often included in these discussions, despite the different industry, is because it provides such a stark, severe example of the consequences of, well, inadequate safety assessments and, critically, a rushed development process that seemed to prioritize speed to market over robustness and thorough verification. It just underscores the dire results that can happen when robust project management practices, rigorous testing, and independent oversight are sacrificed. The lesson is universal, really. Rushing critical stages, especially where safety or core functionality is involved, has potentially catastrophic outcomes.
Prioritizing speed over foundational safety and process can have real-world, sometimes devastating consequences in any complex undertaking, that's clear. And just looking again at general e-commerce business failures, that high rate we started with, the 70–90%.
Yeah, that figure isn't just random bad luck. It's driven by the cumulative effect of all these common pitfalls we've discussed piling up. The sources reiterate things we've touched on. Fundamental poor planning right from the start, inadequate communication strategies, and inability to adapt quickly enough to market shifts, sometimes picking the wrong strategic direction or marketing approach entirely.
It's a long list.
It is. Weak product content that doesn't inform or persuade, unclear or difficult return policies that erode customer trust, poor financial management, especially that cash flow aspect, and simply insufficient or ineffective marketing efforts to actually attract customers. They really highlight that doing a comprehensive feasibility study before you commit significant resources is paramount.
These stories, these examples, they really make the abstract causes concrete, don't they? They show that things like unclear objectives, so scope creep, poor financial management, they aren't just academic concepts on a slide. They are the forces that sink real businesses and real projects, sometimes with very public and painful outcomes.
Definitely. So looking back across this whole deep dive, we've really unpacked the major categories where these e-business projects tend to falter. You've got the internal mechanics of project management itself, the absolutely crucial dynamics of the people involved and their leadership, the vital but often mismanaged financial health of the project, and then those relentless pressures coming from the external world.
And the core takeaway, it seems, the essential first step toward increasing your chances of success with your own e-business projects is really understanding why so many others fail. It's about recognizing these potential risks proactively before they bite you.
And given the inherent complexity of these initiatives, the sheer number of variables involved, and that constantly changing external landscape we discussed, economic, market, legal, tech, social sexism, this deep dive really leaves us with a powerful question, I think. A question for you to consider as a business owner. How can you build a project strategy that isn't just designed to be robust for the challenges you know about today, but is also genuinely adaptable enough to truly navigate the unknown challenges and maybe even seize the unforeseen opportunities of tomorrow?
That adaptability, that resilience in the face of uncertainty, that feels like the ultimate goal, doesn't it? Something to really mull over. Keep all these factors we've discussed today in mind as you plan and execute your next digital endeavor. Your awareness of these pitfalls is probably your strongest defense.
Thanks for joining us today on the eBusiness Playbook.
For the complete PDF with all the insights from this episode, head over to academyglobal.com. There, you'll find the PDF, plus other valuable podcasts and resources to fuel your business growth and career success. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.